Crystal Lake presents Coffee Fueled Stories. Hello, hello, hello. It's me, Michelle, your host and pocket DJ of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. This week's special guest is Gwynne Garfinkle. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, we're going to talk about a couple of your books. One is a book and one is a collection of short stories. So, Can't Find My Way Home and Sinking Singing. And I had no idea that you were going to reference Rolling Stones in any of the stories. And I'm randomly wearing my Rolling Stones t-shirt today.
Uh-huh.
How crazy cool is that? So, Gwynne, let the listeners know a little bit about your background and your books, if you will, please.
Yeah, well, I'm a fiction writer and a poet. I have three books out with Aqueduct Press, who are a really awesome feminist science fiction, fantasy, horror press. Yeah, my newest book is Sinking Singing, which just came out in October. And my novel, Can't Find My Way Home, came out a couple years ago. And in 2018, my book, People Change, came out with Aqueduct, which is half poetry and half short fiction.
Let's start with Can't Find My Way Home because I've got a lot of notes on that. So, can I just say I did something you made me very happy with all of the coffee references. And luckily it was an ebook, so I was able to do a control find, and you referenced coffee on 47 pages.
Wow. Well, I wouldn't have thought that, but then I remember that, it's about a soap opera, and it's like kind of the mandate on soap operas, especially back in the day in the 70s when my book is mostly set, to like reference coffee because they're wanting, the sponsors are wanting to sell a lot of coffee. So that makes sense.
You did a great job. I was going through, and so the first reference you have is on page 40, and you have referenced coffee three times in the first paragraph on that page. And then the best part was on page 48, you have coffee referenced three times in one sentence.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So I was thoroughly enjoying all of the coffee references, and then yes, you do mention that it's part of the soap opera. But what I wanted to ask you, so there's a couple things, is why did you choose the 1970s to have this particular setting? Like, what was there something significant about that era that you wanted to set your this particular book in?
Well, a couple things. One, I mean, the story is about a couple of young women who protest the Vietnam War. So it kind of had to be set like in the late 60s and in the 70s, just by virtue of the fact that it's about that subject. But also, around the time I wrote the book, and a few years before that, I was completely obsessed with the soap opera Orion's Hope, which began in the mid 70s. And it turned out a friend of mine was her first job out of college was on the writing staff, like at the end of the 70s, early 80s, which I didn't find out until after I'd become obsessed with the show. And that just made me more obsessed. But I became fascinated with soap opera production. In the 70s. So that was the other reason. I was just super into that whole subject matter.
Awesome. So also you are a native from California, LA area, and
Yes.
you chose to set it in New York. Was
Yeah.
that also like what was the significance for New York being your setting?
Well, partly because, well, at the time, there were soap operas that were produced in Los Angeles, but many of them were produced in New York. And it was just a very particular situation where a lot of really good theater actors would get would get some money by going on daytime shows. So like you would get really high class, high caliber actors, which is not what people think about when they think soap operas. So that also fascinated me, and I just wanted to delve into that. Also, I actually, when I was a child, I visited New York with my parents in the summer of 1973. Um, New York and Boston, and I was a wonderful time for me. It's the first time I went to New York, and so I was also just kind of interested in recapturing that experience.
So it was very nostalgic in that regard.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. This is something kind of interesting as well. It's as I was reading and learning about your story and with the soap opera setting. My first roommate in the Air Force was a theater major, and she would tell me about soap opera acting. And she said it's actually one of the hardest things to do is to overact. You have to overact in just the right amount just to convey what you're trying to say. She was like, every people will say, oh, it's soap opera. How hard can that be? And she said, actually, it's extremely difficult. And so to have her in the back of my head as I'm reading, you would talk about like the read throughs and how they would have to stand and turn and they do the turn and they, have that I forget exactly what she said, but they turn in such a way and then like their hands or something like that. And so I was just remembering that and it's like I said, it's overacting without overacting.
Well, yeah, and all the other thing is just the sheer amount of memorization you have to do. It's like if you can make it in soap operas, you can do any kind of acting, and it's going to be easy for you because you've just got to memorize reams of dialogue and get it right with almost no preparation, no rehearsal. I mean, it's nothing like, making a film where, okay, let's go again.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I said, I had no idea just how hard soap opera, was until having a theater major actually say, no, it's actually one of the most difficult things to do. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow. I learned I had a new respect for soap opera and the melodramatics of theater in that regard.
Yes. I had also been very obsessed with the 60s soap opera Dark Shadows. And I became good friends with one of the actors from the show, Laura Parker. We went to the same grad school. Um, she was writing a Dark Shadows novelization, and I was writing a vampire novel, and we became good friends. And so I got to learn a lot about soap opera production from her as well.
Oh, that is so cool. Dark Shadows. I remember my mom telling me about Dark Shadows, and then
Yeah.
luckily I was able to see it when they were doing reruns, and so I was like, oh, that's so cool.
Yes.
Uh, One of the things that I had also in my head was, and I don't know if this is offensive, so please, this is actually it's not. I think it's actually not. I think it's a compliment. Erica Zhang, Fear of Flying was
Hmm.
kind of playing in my head. And again, my mom, she had that on her shelf. So my mom is definitely, product of the 60s and the 70s. Like when the Beatles came, she grew up in Argentina and she came to America in 1965. And she had various books on her shelf. And there were certain books that she told me I could not read until I was 30. And Erica Jong, Fear of Flying was one of them, and The Exorcist by William Blatty was also another one. So to have those two books on the shelf and have my mom in my head, and then as I'm reading your book, I'm having Fear of Flying, kind of in my head, and that sexual revolution, if you will. Have you read it? Are you familiar with Erica
That
Jong?
is such a good catch because I was obsessed with Erica Jong many years ago when I was just finishing high school, like early end of high school, beginning college. I Yeah, Fear of Flying, her poetry books, her first three poetry books. Some of her later stuff I didn't think was as good. It's like the more famous and financially successful she became, it just seemed like she wasn't getting good edits, or I don't know. It just, but I mean, because she came up as like a straight up, poet and literary fiction writer, and um, yeah, I mean, no one really knew that Fear of Flying was going to be this giant hit. It was like it was kind of like a little literary novel, till it wasn't. But yes, she was like one of the early poets, the first poets that I got super into when I was a kid.
Awesome. I haven't read Fear of 50 yet. I should though, even though I'm already in my 50s, but it was kind of one of those things. I wasn't sure if I wanted to tap back into
Well,
her or
that's a
not. So,
pretty good one.
yeah.
Another good one by her is her book about Henry Miller, The Devil at Large.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'll have to check that out because I was, fascinated with Henry Miller and Anais Nin,
Hmm.
it, during my literary revolution.
Hmm.
When you're like, wow, people can say that. They can do those things and say those things. Okay.
Hmm.
So I'll have to check that one out. Thank you very much. Um, the name Hope Springs Eternal was the name for the show.
Hmm.
And was that something that you like? Did you have to think, gosh, what do I want to call the show? How many names did you come up with? Or was that just the first name that came to you and you were like, that's what I'm going to call the show in this book?
I think I did go through quite a few. I think I did go through. I definitely wanted hope in the name, even though there was Ryan's Hope. But yeah, I mean, hope is kind of a theme of the book. So yeah, I definitely wanted that to be in there.
Nice. And so, over the weekend, as I was reading your book, I you reference Janis Joplin in there,
Mhm.
and I put on because it was actually the name of one of the chapter sections, and so I was listening to my Janis Joplin while I was reading, and I wanted to know, do you have a favorite Janis Joplin, or is she just if all of her stuff is just so good that you just can't pick one?
Oh gosh, it would be hard to pick. Um, Actually, I'm very fond of Combination of the Two, which is not one that people usually, I mean, it's like early, her first band, and she isn't, I mean, she's singing, but it's kind of like it's the band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, kind of just rocking out. I really love that song, Combination of the Two, from Cheap Thrills.
Yeah, that's a good one. I have the CD. I have a CD box set of it's 3 so it's like this crazy. It's like literally the collection of like all of her from the start to the end before she passed away.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really interesting. I've read a couple of her not biographies, and I had no idea she actually started out as a beat poet. Like, that was kind of her beginning, in
Mhm.
Port Arthur, and then she used to go into New Orleans, and she did beat poetry, and I thought, "Oh my god, how freaking cool is that?"
Yeah, really, really. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, when I was young, I was very into her version of Ball and Chain for sure.
Yeah, there's just something there's something so beautiful and tragic about her story.
Yeah,
It's just, oh, like, I wish we had more, that
definitely.
damn 27 club, you know?
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah. So, music is prevalent in both stories,
Mhm.
both the book and singing. And I wanted to ask you: is there a particular song that you can hear that you just like lose your mind and you just literally just keep repeating that same song?
Um, yes. Well, there was a singer, songwriter named Scott Miller. There are 2 Scott Millers. One is still alive, one is no longer alive. The one who's no longer alive, he had a band called, Game Theory, and then another band called The Loud Family, and many of his songs kind of fit into what you're saying, but, he had a song called Aero Deliria from the first, Loud Family album that, yes, it's kind of a stop everything kind of song for me, definitely.
That's awesome. There's something so magical about music, and obviously something magical about books as well. And there's just something that I just certain songs, will come on and just instantly will transport me back into childhood, or instantly remind me of my mom, or my teenage years. Like there's just certain things, which by the way, Adamant was a huge, he was prevalent in my youth, and he just turned 70 yesterday,
Wow.
and I'm just like, wow, where has the time gone? But the guy who was plastered all over my walls, the guy that just I couldn't get enough of, just turned 70 yesterday. So happy birthday, Adamant. Uh,
Indeed.
uh, so in singing, you reference K Earth and KRLA. And I remember growing up on those stations and of course K Rock.
Yes.
And um, so I don't know about you, but it's kind of funny now because when I first remember hearing K Earth as a child, they were playing music from the 50s and the 60s.
Yes.
And now when you listen to K Earth, they're playing music from the 80s.
It's not just the 80s, the 90s and the aughts. It's really shocking to me. It's shocking. I mean, but of course, when I was first listening to K Earth, those songs were not that old. Those 60s records, they weren't that old.
They were. I remember. And one of the coolest things was uh the name just skipped, but he wrote Traveling Man, Nelson.
Rick Nelson.
Ricky Nelson, yes. We got to see Ricky Nelson before he died, and that was the coolest thing. Like standing next to my mom, like this guy, like had a huge influence on my mom in her childhood. And here we are watching Ricky Nelson performing, Traveling Man, and it was just like I said, it was just the coolest thing. Like just that experience. And so, like I said, as I'm reading your book, I'm just having all of this nostalgia just like pop into my head. And so thank you for taking me down a musical path of memories and nostalgia.
Yeah, well, that yes, the story that refers to those stations is definitely, LA back in the day.
For sure. I just looked at my notes and I remembered something. You reference Ibsen, and because they're in her theater classes.
Mhm,
And Henrik Ibsen was one of we studied him. We studied the Dollhouse,
mhm,
a Dollhouse.
mhm.
And so the fact that you referenced Ibsen, like that just made me like so happy because I love his work. I love what he did.
Mhm.
Um, do you have a favorite Ibsen story?
Oh, yes, I'm blocking out the name. Name some Ibsen plays, and I'll tell you the one that
It was Haba Gardner, I think, was the one that was referenced.
Hedda Gabler. It's
Peter
not that
Gabler, yeah.
one, although I really like that one.
Uh, a Dollhouse. Like I said, we only studied a Dollhouse, so I only have that one,
Great
that
too.
play.
Um, just trying to remember the name because yeah, there is one, and I'm just blanking on it. But I mean, yeah, those two are great. Hedda Gabler is great. Doll's House, of course, is a very important, feminist wise. And yeah, Joanna, the protagonist in my book would certainly have been into him. I'm looking it up. I'm looking it up. Ghosts. Yeah, Ghost is my favorite.
Oh, I have to look into that one. I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah.
I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I found out, so we I didn't realize just how important drama was. Like you everybody thinks Shakespeare and reading and things of that, but we read it at a completely different level in grad school, and Ibsen and Shakespeare. And when we were reading, like I said, a Dollhouse, like I just lost my mind. I had no idea drama was so free. Like if I would have known, I would have studied it a long time ago because it is magnificent. It is magical. Like there's things that happen in between the lines.
Mhm.
And you don't realize that until you just really deep dive into it. And so like I said, when you referenced Ibsen, and then of course you have, the way that you did the story, like weaving with Joanna Anson, I was just like, wow, how, and then, like I said, thinking of it as like on a play level, like at a theater, like I said, my brain just was like, what is
Me
she?
too.
So you've got the layers of the drama, you've got the layers of the music, you've got the layers of New York, war, all of these different things just like it was just wow. It was
Well,
just
thank you. And also, I mean, my favorite thing about the book is like the different realities, the different versions of her life,
yeah.
which is
Yeah.
which was not in the first. I mean, that didn't come into like the third draft. I was like, it needs something. And then I figured out that was what it needed. I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. And it really was fun to write those other versions of her life.
How long did it take you to write this book?
That one took a really long time. Because I mean, they say write a garbage first draft, but sometimes that's actually not the best strategy. And and because my first draft of that book was in the third person. The book is in the first person now. Yeah, started out in the third person for no other reason but that the novel I had previously written was in the third person. And so I just started it that way. And yeah, between that and just the fact that and the ending was different, and it didn't have the alternate versions of things anyway. So it's like I wrote a quick first draft, and then I wrote like a god awful second draft, in third person. And and at that point, I kind of rethought it. But I had done a lot of research, and very little of it made it into the first couple drafts. A lot of it I got to use when she started having these other versions of her life, because then that stuff that I had already researched came in really handy. Um, yes, and I was working full time when I was writing this book, and I'm not a very fast writer. So yes, it took several years, but part of it was really, just my fault in terms of kind of going down the wrong path and not stopping myself. I finished writing a novel this year that's so far unpublished, but I had tried to write it a few times, and I'd been like, something is wrong, and I'm not going to keep going like I did with that other book. I'm going to wait till I figure out what I'm doing wrong. And I actually did wait. And then all of a sudden, I started writing it again, and I like, oh yeah, my conception of this character was completely wrong. And once it was right, I could write the book. But if I had just written, it would have been, a completely different, and I don't think very good book if I had just gone ahead with it in spite of my misgivings.
See, that is, thank you for saying all of that and sharing that, because I think that is like so important as a learning process, like as part of the writing process. Now, what did someone, or for in regard to shifting from third person to first person, did somebody say, I think maybe you might want to change that, your narrator from first to third? Or was that something that you just decided to do on like you were
I
like, no, something doesn't feel right here.
I decided, well, at the time I had an agent who had signed me for a different project, and then my poor agent having to read this god awful draft. I mean, technically it was proficient. It was the second draft. I mean, it was well written. It was just not a good book. And Yeah, I mean, she was just kind of like, I don't, this is wrong, and I don't know how to tell you to fix it, was basically what she said, which is good, really. I mean, because it's like, she's not the one who has to write the thing. And I was like, okay. And I went away and thought, and I was like, I think the first thing I thought was it should be in first person. That was kind of the first thing I identified. And and then I was like, okay, she's right that the ending doesn't work. And so I was sort of thinking, okay, I thought it would end this one way, but it needs to end a different way. Um, so I mean, it's not easy to change tenses of a book, but it's not. I mean, those were in a way easy fixes, just in terms of, okay, I've identified a thing, it needs to change. But then, you know, yeah, it really was just like, yeah, but but so what? There's something missing. It needs more than this. And then, I have no idea how it occurred to me to have the alternate versions of her life. I just know that when it occurred to me, I was like, yes, I am on the right track. Yes, I will enjoy revising this book now. It just kind of it gave the book a fun that it lacked. It was a very grim book. I mean, because the subject matter is kind of grim about, the death of a young woman and the guilt of her friend who goes on with her life. It without that other stuff, it was grim, and it needed something else that would make it fun.
And I think you nailed it, and that's it. Because I'm trying to think, like, I only know this version, which is first person, and you really get to know the main character and her best friend. And I'm trying to imagine if it was in third person, you just wouldn't have that connection. You just wouldn't feel as connected to the story, and you wouldn't be able to hang on to that guilt. Because guilt is like you said, that's heavy. That's a very deep emotion. And how do you entertain with guilt, right? That's the question, right? So the fact that you are able to come up with this concept, keep us connected with this character, and follow her path, even though it has, different outcomes depending
Mhm.
on what happens.
Mhm.
It like that just felt right. Like that, just like based off of what you're telling me, I'm like, yeah, like
And it also gave more dynamics to the relationship between the two women, because things happen between them that couldn't happen because she's dead. She's at the beginning of the book, she's dead, but when there's these other versions of Joanna's life, then it just allowed me to explore their relationship in different ways.
absolutely. I love that, and like it's grim, it's heavy. Yeah, she's dead, and but like you said, you have fun with it, you entertain, and the conversations, the banter between the characters, and how everything tells a story. It was like I said, it was fresh and entertaining, and like I said, I had a lot of fun reading it. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in general, it's a good rule of thumb for me anyway, is if I'm not having fun with the thing, figure out why and figure out what I can do, because, if I'm not going to have fun with it, probably no one else is going to enjoy reading it.
You have some music. We're going to go back to the music. So I wanted to ask you about your record collection. Do you still have a record collection?
I do have many LPs, although, and I have a record player, but it is not currently hooked up. But I do still have the albums, and I have a lot of CDs. Yes, I have a lot of physical media, although, on a day-to-day basis, I mostly just stream things, but I still keep the stuff.
I hear you. I have some records that I refuse. I remember that was my allowance. I would spend my allowance money at the record store, and I would get imports, and the imports always cost more.
Mhm.
So I would have to like save up or ask. So car washing was how I would earn my money, and so I would say, "Hey, I'll do a special detail on your car, mom, for $20." Because $20 would buy me
A lot back
it,
then.
it would. And
Yeah.
so usually I could get two of the very special European editions,
Hmm.
deep cuts, bootlegs. I only have a couple of those. But because I try not to, I don't want, we're just not going to go down that rabbit hole. But yes, so I have some albums, CDs, and I do the same thing streaming. So when you are writing, do you listen to music while you're writing?
Yeah, a lot of the time I do. Although sometimes if I'm deeply into it, I'll be like, my favorite song will have just played and I'm like, didn't even hear it because and then I might go back and actually listen to it. Um, yeah, a lot of the time, well, like the book that I just finished and I'm working on a sequel now, the character is a musician, and so it's like I listen to a lot of the same records over and over that are kind of are things I think she likes, or things that just kind of evoke a certain thing about her and the book. And I mean, I in my novel, Can't Find My Way Home, I each chapter title is a song, and again, it's songs of a particular time period, things that Joanna would know. Um, so yeah, it's music is a big part of my process.
And of course, because we're talking about coffee and you mentioned coffee, coffee. So, how much coffee do you drink in a day? Do you drink coffee?
I love coffee. I don't drink nearly as much as I would like. If I could drink it all day long, I would. I nowadays I usually just have one fairly large cup, eh, sometimes a second smaller cup, but I have to cut myself off, unfortunately.
I can relate. In my 20s, I used to drink a pot of coffee. I'm not gonna lie. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I was I was that girl. And now in my 50s, yeah, I can't do that. So
yeah.
I'm right there with you. Totally. So two final things. Because for coffee. Uh you mentioned Bela Lugosi and coffee. Can I just say my little heart just burst? I was like, no, she didn't. She's talking about Bela Lugosi and coffee. Like, does it get any better than that? I don't think so. I literally wrote Bela Lugosi and coffee equals perfection, smiley face. So why did you choose Bella to be for this particular story?
I had this idea of what would happen if he had actually not decided that the role of Frankenstein's monster was basically too good for him, which clearly he realized had been a big mistake career wise. Um, so I had tried to, it took me a while to figure out that the story should be from Bela Lugosi's perspective. I had originally written a story about someone like like an old time movie fan, like me, someone who watches Turner Classic Movies all the time, and that just one day, all of a sudden, the movies were different, and Bela Lugosi, like Boris Karloff, no longer was in any of the movies, and I tried to write it that way, but it just, if you weren't a super film geek like me, it just wasn't that fun. I think it was fun. There was a lot I could say, but it just was not working story wise. So eventually I was like, no, I'm going to tell it from Bela Lugosi's point of view, and show that it still wouldn't have worked out for him because he's not the same kind of actor as Boris Karloff. I mean, Bela Lugosi, was a there are wonderful things about him as an actor, but they were not the same things. He could not do the same things that Boris Karloff could do.
Each one, so Boris, Bella, and Lon Chaney, like they own those roles. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just, at least it's burned into my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Learning about them, the universal creatures and monsters. That this is who they were. Like that was, I mean, that's what they were known for.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't. So I'm trying to imagine. Could you see them swapping, roles and things? Like, how would it be? How would it
Yeah.
feel? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It was just interesting way for me to explore like professional jealousy and opportunity, like, what making the most of the opportunities that are given to you. And what happens when, if you choose wrongly, is it actually a mistake? It's like, clearly I don't think it was a mistake for Bela Lugosi not to take the role of Frankenstein's monster. I really think I don't think we would have had the franchise that we had if that had happened. Um, but yeah, I mean, I kind of was just thinking of it in a broader sense of just like, yeah, like not being envious of your peers. And respecting their gift, respecting your own, not and understanding the difference between the two.
You know, thank you for saying that, Gwen, because there are so I I don't view anyone as competition.
Hmm.
For me, like I love that there are so many different types of, let's just pick vampire stories.
Yeah.
Vampire stories have been around for a long time. It's not a new idea.
Hmm.
However, the fact that people can still come up and create different types of vampires or take that same thread and do something new or something different with it, that excites me. Like instead of, oh, you're never going to compare to so and so. No, please, you have something new. I'm the type that I'm like, bring it to the table.
Hmm.
I got a fork and knife, and I'm like, let's dig in. Like, let's go. Like, I always like to use the word meaty or chew on. Like, I love books and literature that stimulate me and excite me. And like I said, I'll read every vampire story out there. Like, it excites me. That's who. It's not competition. It's not.
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah, so I don't understand that mentality. I'm, here to share authors. I want to know. I love what you said about your story. Like you were open and honest enough to talk about, how your first draft was not what you had anticipated and then switching that perspective from, your third person to first person. Like that's growth. Like that show like like I said, I'm like thank you for saying that. So to be able to share and want to spread and talk about how we're not people aren't competing. Like we're here to and because you're a member of the HWA,
Hmm.
like yes, we are all like how many horror writers are in that community? A lot.
Yep, yep.
A lot. And nobody's competing. We're here to say, hey, you've got a story? Share it, please.
Well, yeah, it's a much happier mindset for sure.
For sure, for sure. And now I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. And I'm gonna end it with two last thoughts. You reference Cat People as a band, but I wanted to ask you, did you see Cat People, the movie?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, the original Cat People is one of my favorite, very favorite movies.
I love that story. I had no that my little 80s brain just I loved that movie. I don't know, there's something really cool about it. And then you also mentioned this is the last thing, CBGB.
Hmm.
Did you make it to CBGB before it
No,
closed down?
I never went. I never went.
Me neither. Me neither. I stood underneath the awning at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I never made it to CBGB when it was actually still in New York, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
alas.
Oh, well, now I feel like we're ending it on a sad note. I don't want to end it on a sad
But
note.
I went to a lot of really cool, clubs in LA when I was a teenager. So there is that.
Right? So Whiskey A Go Go and the Roxy, the Rainbow Room. Like I spent a lot of time on the Sunset Strip between those three rock concert sessions, whatever you want, clubs.
Mhm.
Um, and I had my teenage years, like some of my best times are at Whiskey A Go Go.
Me too. Me
Yeah,
too.
right? I mean, yeah, it's great, 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 great stuff. Great stuff. So, on that note, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for talking about all of the lovely things that we were able to tap into in regard to your stories. And I wanted to say thank you for your time. And I want to let the listeners know where can they find you, more about you.
Well, I have a website, gwynnegarfinkle.com. Um, I'm on Blue Sky. I always forget how to say the hashtag. I'm Gwynga, like GWYNNEGA at Blue Sky. The rest of that, what the rest of that is.
We'll put that link in the show notes
Yeah.
for you.
I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but I really do enjoy Blue Sky. I think it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for hanging out and taking the time to talk about coffee and music. And I would love if you would sign us off with my tagline of "Go forth and be magical."
Go forth and be magical.
Thank you for listening and joining in the conversation throughout season 4. This year, we learned so much about the writing process and the writing journeys of each awesome guest. This bonus holiday episode is brought to you by Memento Mori Inc. magazine, a publication for those with a more refined palate. Every dark morsel designed to whet your appetite. The winter issue is coming. Look for it January 2025. That's a wrap on season 4. Wishing you happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. See you next year for season 5.